The word funky means modern, artistic, unconventional, and cool. And I think this word applies equally well to the device we're reviewing today, the FunKey S. At 65 euros, the FunKey S is meant to mimic the Game Boy Advance SP design, but oh, it can play so much more. With a 1.2 GHz processor, it can basically emulate anything from the Game Boy up to the PS1, although not 100% emulation for the latter. It has a built-in 32GB SD card which can be expanded up to 128GB, an LCD display with a resolution of 240 by 240, a mono speaker, a 410 mAh battery, and a micro USB port that can charge the battery and also load your games. These specs make it a little bit more powerful than the Retro Flag, but way less powerful than the Pi Boy DMG, which uses a Raspberry Pi 0 and 4 respectively. Now let's take a closer look at the device itself. The plastic finish is really nice, it got its own lanyard, and the only thing that you can see around its surroundings is the micro USB port. Up front, we've got the FunKey S logo and two shoulder buttons at the top. These guys are really clicky too. Opening the device, we are greeted with its colored screen, and of course I've changed my face buttons to mimic that of the SNES style. And as you can see here, the profile is really thin. Going to the back, we see the two screws that holds the cover, and of course there's nothing on the other side. But how tiny is it, you might ask? Well, it's basically as wide and tall as 4 AAA batteries, and as you can see here, you have them side by side, with the FunKey S only a tad bit thicker and a tad bit wider. But what about the screen? Well, if you've got the regular Nintendo Switch, the icon of a Nintendo Switch is basically as big as the FunKey S screen itself. You can see me here comparing the Monster Hunterized icon on the Nintendo Switch with the screen of the FunKey S, and you can see they are really very comparable to each other. So gone are the days when you are basically paralyzed by indecision on which handheld to bring. Just look over your handheld, pick the smallest one, and you're good to go. Fits snugly in the pocket too. And just to hammer the size in of how tiny a FunKey S really is, here is the tiniest Game Boy Advance from the Game Boy line, the Game Boy Micro. And as you can see, it's way tinier than that. Its width is even almost as wide as the screen of the Game Boy Micro itself. And when you open it, the screen is also tinier, and it's a square shape instead of the rectangular shape of the Micro. But even when open, it's still way tinier than the Micro, as you can see here. We can even compare it with the cartridges, and as you can see, an opened FunKey S is very comparable to the Game Boy Advance cartridge. You see me here comparing it with the Easy Flash 4. Now the FunKey can emulate the Game Boy, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Game Gear, Sega Master System, Sega Genesis, TurboGrafx 16, Lynx, Neo Geo Pocket, WonderSwan Color, and the PlayStation. Now you can press the menu button to look at various options that you can set, such as brightness, volume, or you can power down it from here. Here we see the default menu option, but you can always change it if you don't want. That's the classic. You can change it to flat, which makes the menu looks like this if you prefer. You can change it to TFT. Yeah, this one lists more of your games, so which is nice. But I do personally prefer the classic. You can change it to the FunKey. And it looks like this. It displays up to 4 games. But personally, I prefer the classic one, so that's what I usually go to. The FunKey S even has an alternative launcher called the G-Menu 2X, which you can enter as an alternative to your Retro FE. This is very similar to the launcher used by RG 350M and the RG280V, basically the older Anbernic models. As you can see right here, we're gonna compare it very quickly to the G menu of an RG350M. Here's my RG350M. So as you can see, it's a very similar menu, very similar launcher. And you can see the two of them here side by side. So you can use that, but I prefer personally the default Retro FE launcher myself. Now, one of the most awesome thing about the FunKey S is that it introduced me to this concept of one-handed gaming, where you can basically play like a strategy or tactical RPG titles with just using one hand. For example, Fire Emblem right here on the Game Boy Advance. This is not an action-heavy game, and it's a game that you can basically play with just one hand. Isn't that cool? One-handed gaming. Typically, when you think of gaming, you know, you usually use your two hands, but here, using the FunKey S, it's definitely possible to play it one-handed. Here is another game that I attempted to play one-handed while looking out my window. It's of course a PS1 title, and it is Tekken 3. And as you can see right here, you can continue a game upon opening a FunKey S. And the nice thing about the FunKey S is that if you're done, like this one here, you can close it. And then when you open it again, it basically starts where you left off. FunKey! Now, what are my gripes about the FunKey? The fact that they wanted it to be very tiny means that they had to sacrifice the headphone jack. As you can see right here, the Game Boy Micro, no matter how tiny it is, it still had the headphone jack. That means you can play even in a loud environment. But unfortunately, if you pick up your FunKey and look around it, it has no headphone jack at all. So, you know, games that have very nice music like Castlevania, Final Fantasy, unfortunately you can't enjoy the music here because there's no headphone jack at all. Another gripe I have about the FunKey S is its shoulder buttons. So most handhelds are designed such that your palm basically collides with the bottom of the handheld, basically enabling you to press the shoulder button. So as you can see here in the Anbernic, in the RG350, when you press the shoulder buttons, the bottom of the Anbernic hits your palm very nicely, so pressing the shoulder buttons won't be so difficult. However, for the FunKey, it's a bit hard because you know you don't have that leverage. Your palm is a bit far from your shoulder buttons, so when you're pressing the shoulder buttons, you either have to grip it tightly or you put your thumb under. So sometimes it can be very, very hard to position yourself, you know. And yeah, it's really very hard to look for a comfortable position. So if the game is shoulder button heavy, it won't be so comfortable with the FunKey S, unfortunately, because of how tiny it is. A specific example of this is of course Mega Man Zero, where you use your L shoulder button to dash. As you can see here, I am holding my thumb at the bottom so that I can press it properly, but that means letting go of the D-pad. And also the R button allows you to choose the other weapon, but again, that means releasing the face buttons. So one way to circumvent this is to actually assign the L on the Y button and the R on the X button, or what you can do is you go to the in-game setting of Mega Man such that instead of holding R, you just tap R to change the weapon. So that's one of the ways that you can solve this problem. So you go to Type C, and then pressing R basically switches weapon instead of holding R to switch the current weapon that you have. Another thing that you can do again is you can map the L and R on the Y and X respectively, something that will be coming in the next firmware update. Finally, the FunKey S only has a single speaker on the left side, so your left thumb actually sometimes covers it when playing. So as you can see here, sometimes when you're playing like down diagonal, sometimes the thumb covers the speaker. FunKey! So is the FunKey S worth your 65 euros? For me personally, I think it really is. You know, even though it has its failures, like it doesn't have a headphone jack, it only has one speaker that you sometimes cover, the placement of the shoulder buttons is not very ideal, it is really very good when it comes to tactical games, RPG games. You might be worried, RPG, the text will be too small. Trust me, it's not. Like, of course, it depends on your eyes, but for a normal eyesight, I believe it's fine. In one of my videos, I actually played the Castlevania Symphony of the Night. I was able to play the entire intro backstory. I read it while on the FunKey S, so it's very legible. And yeah, it's a very nice item. I don't think it's just a novelty device. When I got this, it's been with me ever since I've had it last week, and it's my go-to console if I want to pick up and do some short gaming session. So what are you waiting for? If you don't have this world's tiniest foldable console that can fit into a keychain, go out there and go get yourself some FunKey!